for a few council members. We just need one more and we will have a quorum.
Ignore that last email, Heather. I didn't see you a few minutes ago.
Councilman Mitchell.
Yes, sir. I got your email this morning.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I haven't been out there yet.
It looks good.
Oh boy, I tell you, it's a rough area around there, I tell you.
Yes, sir.
I know there's still parking on that side, and I don't know, I have to keep the parking enforcement officer going around there, because they're still parking on the big signs up there saying no parking, no sitting, no standing. They're still parking there.
I had Tyron Lawrence with us today too. So
Okay.
they had a full-blown effect there. So everything went well.
Okay, fine. I'll drive through later on.
Yes, sir.
I'll paint my car first.
They might be back now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're probably back. But it's the big thing is that okay.
And Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum now. Councilmember Gregory just joined.
All righty. Councilman Waring is not here yet, right?
No, sir. We are waiting on council members Waring, Parker, and the mayor.
Oh, I'll give them a few more minutes. Then we go ahead and get started.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd like to put something on the agenda for our next community development meeting.
Okay, the next meeting.
The next meeting, and it will be Senate Bill 233. And I would like to see whether or not our community development department, along with our legal department, can determine whether or not we can use this bill to increase the resources for affordable housing in the city.
All righty.
I second that motion. Councilman Gregory, I almost ran off the road. You got me so excited. Looking forward to it.
Okay, I'm on it. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Ms. Johnson, will you put that down so you can remind me? Thank you much. Is the mayor on yet?
He's joining now.
Okay. All righty, the mayor is there, so we can get started. I think Councilman Waring will be coming shortly. Okay.
Hey, everyone. Hey, Mr. Chairman.
All righty, we're gonna get started. We have a quorum, so we're gonna go and get started. Okay, the day is now July 21st. The time is now 3:04. I'd like to call the Community Development Committee meeting to order. As customary, we always have an invocation, and I will ask everyone to bow their head for silence and remember the unfortunate and the things that's happening in this community and in the country and in the world today that COVID has started on the rise again, and a lot of young people that we are losing. So we are asking the Most High for guidance. Amen.
Amen.
The first thing on the agenda is a public participation. Do we have anyone from the public wanting to speak?
We only have one telephone number. If that's anyone from the public who wanted to speak, you can press *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, we'll give them 2 minutes.
All right, I don't hear anyone.
Okay.
So I think we're good.
Okay, we'll move right along. Can I have a approval for the June 16 minutes, please? Item B, approval of the minutes for June 16th.
So move.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and second. All in vote for favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We don't have any old business, so we'll go around down to new business. The new business is increasing affordable housing units for household experienced homelessness in the city of Charleston. The presentation by Heather and the Senior Management Housing Community Development. So Heather is on you right now.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name is Heather Dillashaw. I'm a HUD technical assistance provider and have been working with both Gianna and Matt and lots of other folks in your region the last several months to look at ways to increase affordable units across your region. I know that this is you're just concerned with Charleston, but some of the numbers I'm going to give you you're going to see are region wide, but also show some specificity to Charleston. I'm going to share my screen if I can. I don't know if is that okay if I do that?
Sure, it's fine.
Jennifer, can you help?
Sure. There's a button down at the bottom that says share screen. And if you click on that, you should, there you go.
Let me know if you can see that.
Yes.
And actually, while she's pulling that up, if everyone could keep their phones on mute during the presentation, that way we don't get any background noise. Thank you.
And it is up, Heather. Thank you.
Okay, great. So you can see it. And I think Gianna's going to send this to you after the meeting, so you have this in writing as well. What we did over the last several months was held a series of meetings with stakeholders across the Lowcountry to talk about what is available and what isn't in their areas for units that are dedicated to households who are experiencing homelessness. And while there are not many, there are ways that we can increase units. There is not, I would say at the outset, there is not one magic bullet for this, right? The answer to ending homelessness is housing, and you are in a very huge deficit of affordable units across the board, as you are well aware with the work that you do on this committee. The numbers are rising in your area for unsheltered homelessness in particular. I'm sure that you can see that when you are in your neighborhoods and as you're moving through the city. But the numbers that I'm going to talk through in a minute are both around the rental assistance dollars that are needed to start closing the gap, specifically for households that are literally homeless, as well as the units that are needed. So there are two pieces of this, right? You need the actual units, like you need to increase your housing stock, as well as the rental assistance that can help sustain homeless households as they transition from homelessness to housing, right? So there's two numbers. So when we look at Charleston here, it's about $10 million in rental assistance to close the gap. And then a little over 2,000 units. These are probably conservative estimates when we look at them. Your annual homeless need across the region is around 2,000. Those are 97% individuals with only 3 to 4% of families. And the way that we define that when we look at the data would be an adult in a minor age, at least one adult and a minor age child constitutes a family. So single individuals are by far the majority of need in your area. That's true in most places in the country. What we don't have in here, because the data is hard to get, is where your dedicated units are with housing vouchers, like How many homeless households have been placed with housing vouchers? That's unclear to us. We also know that your public housing agencies do not have a preference for homeless households. So we think the number that is placed through those partnerships is probably fairly low. It's very high in some other areas and is a good data point, but right now that seems to be fairly low for you. So big numbers, and probably not, hopefully not surprising to you as you think about what you can see just walking around or driving through your region. So the biggest barriers are the low availability of units, period, right? So you have a low vacancy rate in Charleston for units that turn over, right? So that's just hard. Like a healthy vacancy rate is somewhere between 8 and 10%. Last time I looked, yours was around 4 or 5. I meant to look that up today, Gianna, and I forgot. So I'm not sure where that sits currently, but yours is low. It's not a healthy vacancy rate. I'm sure you're well aware of that. So you don't have a healthy vacancy rate in general, which means you need new units, right? New literal units. The other piece of that is even your units that are available are not at fair market rent, right? They are driven very much by the private market and the desire of people to live in Charleston. You have people, your population continues to increase, not just your homeless population, but your population continues to increase, right? You're a desirable place to live. People move there. And so as soon as the unit's available, it gets leased up, and landlords do not have an incentive to rent below private market values. So several things. And again, unfortunately, these are pretty consistent variables across the country. So the work that we do in trying to help communities come up with strategies to increase units are multi-pronged because, like I said, there is no one magic bullet unless somebody actually had the money to build all the units you needed all at once and fill them with the rental assistance and supportive services, right? And we have not yet seen a community do that, right? That doesn't tend to be where money is spent. So the recommendations that we've made are several. One, from the municipality side, this is true for Charleston County, all the other municipalities that we've been engaged with in this work, is look at your public funding streams, whether those are your federal funding streams or your local funding streams that are going toward development, they're going toward housing development. I know you do put money into affordable housing development. One of the things that we highly recommend and we see progress with in municipalities is making sure that in those new developments that a portion of those units are dedicated to homeless households, meaning the management company / developer is required to use however many units you set. Like we say, start small, like say 5, dedicate 5% or 5 units or something like that, right? In each affordable development to start moving that needle a little bit so that you have sustainable housing stock that stays dedicated to folks who are experiencing homelessness. We recommend you do that across the board in all of your funds that are going toward development, federal and local. The other
Heather,
yes.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Are we suggesting that would be in addition to a fee in lieu of or our 20% that we currently have in MU housing?
Yes.
Okay, so we may be talking in some instances as high as 25%.
If you can.
Okay.
I mean, when you look at the numbers, right, this is the only way to make progress, right? You're not making progress right now. You're going in the opposite direction, right? The only way to make progress is to increase that possibility across the board, right? Don't put the burden on any one developer, but try to share that, right, across. Because what we don't want to there's not a great way to say this. We'd rather not silo off everybody who's homeless into one development on their own, right? Like the siloing of poverty, we know does not work well, that's not healthy for individuals that are living there. It's not healthy for the community overall. And so if you spread that across developments, it's more sustainable for everybody and for neighborhoods, to be honest.
I agree with you totally. There shouldn't be an undue concentration of homeless people, low-income people, et cetera, et cetera. My second question to you, I just wanted clarity. My second question is, you stated that the Housing Authority does not have a program to address homelessness. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that one of the provisions for being housed on their waiting list, there is something on there that deals with not being housed. Am I correct? And wouldn't that accomplish what we're talking about regarding homelessness and the involvement of the housing authority in that?
It's a great question. So the way that those preferences work is your housing authority has preferences for everything.
Yes.
So the homeless preference does not get any more attention than any other preference.
Okay.
The places where we've seen PHAs make progress with a preference is when the homeless preference is the first one that they use.
Excuse me, Heather. I think we're getting some feedback from someone. If you're not speaking, please put your phone on mute because we're getting a lot of feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So the only way a preference is really makes a difference is if you've prioritized that preference. Local housing authorities have a lot of latitude in how they do that. Yours currently are not making homeless as a priority status for housing.
And then I think, Heather, you're right. And with the housing authority, they don't have units set aside a priority for homelessness. And because so many people have priorities so far as senior citizens, so far as health problem, and they're putting on a list, but there's no priority set if they're made by them for homelessness that way.
Correct.
Could we really check that out thoroughly, please?
While working with the housing authority.
No, I'm just saying, can we just check those preferences out thoroughly? Because everybody, just about everybody that's on the waiting list for the housing authority, one of the reasons they're on the waiting list is because they need to be housed, number one. And yes, it's broken down into other categories. Again, I'm just saying, I just like to make sure so that if we need to approach them, perhaps to prioritize homelessness in their list of preferences, we'd be on the right track. I just want to make sure we're on the right track. That's all. Thanks, Heather.
You're welcome. The other piece that goes with this, with any of this, right, is landlord engagement. The public sector is never going to solve homelessness on its own, period. There's not enough money and there's not enough capacity to do that. We have to use the private market. The housing authority has to use the private market, right, with vouchers, those kinds of things, but they also struggle to have landlords engage. And so one of the things we've done work on the last couple of months is recommending that your area starts looking at making a centralized housing access program, what that means is that there is a program, right? One stopping point, both for landlords and for providers who are trying to house folks who are homeless, that landlords buy into and that providers buy into. So it's a centralized place that landlords can get support. They can sign up to be a landlord. Providers can look for units. Because right now what you have is a very siloed approach, right? Like one provider who's serving homeless folks will call landlord one, 3 other providers are call that same landlord the next day, right? So landlords are getting calls from multiple people. Providers are looking at multiple landlords, and everybody's using the same people, right? I mean, there's this perception that everybody thinks they have their own landlords that work just with them, and that's almost never true, right? Landlords work with whoever they can work with to fill their units for the most part. So what we've seen some success in several other places is a centralized access model. And I can maybe, Gianna, I can send a link to the Nashville site to you, so you can send that out with this document. And I think that'd probably be useful for folks if they want to look at it. And what it is that you invest as a community into at least one staff person, maybe 2, that this is their job. Their job is to cultivate partnerships with landlords. Their jobs are to manage the inventory of folks that have agreed to dedicate units, right? And also manage a landlord incentive pot, right? So there's a sign-on bonus for landlords if they agree to dedicate a unit for 12 months to do a 12-month lease with the household. They have access to a mitigation fund if there is damage above what their insurance covers. They have another possibility that we've seen is a hold fee, meaning like when a unit turns over, if it doesn't turn over fast enough, then they can pay rent. They can get the rent for the month or two that maybe they lose as the unit is turning over. So various ways to incentivize landlords to use the program and keep their finances stable. We have seen a lot of success with existing units, even new units, definitely, but also with existing units. We worked in Nashville, Tennessee, who has a lot of similar dynamics to you. Their population's a little higher, but they lots of similar dynamics around tourists, around availability of units, all of those. They're very similar dynamics to you. And they have been able to increase some months by 50 new units added through the work of the staff people that are working there, that are dedicated to this and working with landlords. And they are now having landlords recruit other landlords because the program is working so well. So that is, we believe, a key component for how you can start having a more collaborative approach to making this happen rather than the silos that folks are working in right now. Those combined with that work combined with dedicating as many, throughout your project, your development projects, and working with the housing authorities to get some more dedication, right now seem to be the biggest ways that you can start increasing the availability of units to folks who are experiencing homelessness.
Yes,
Gianna, what have I missed?
Heather, before we go back to Gianna, Heather, I was working with that years ago when trying to get landlords to rent to people with Section 8 certificate or Section 8 vouchers. Mm-hmm. And they had me to go out and try to work with landlords and landlords to do the same thing that you were talking about now. Most of the landlords didn't want to do it because of the type of money that the Section 8 pays for their certificate, for their voucher or certificate is much less than they're renting these homes or renting these apartments for now. And that's one of the biggest problems that we had encountered during that time. So how we can change it, that's something I have to come up with. We have to come up with to try to see how we can change that. I'll speak for the landlords because they're renting like for 3 bedrooms, they want $1,500 and up. Section 8 for 3 bedroom, they give you up to, I think it's $900, I think it is. And that's way less than most of these places are doing. And they just start going up, escalating the rent more on even some of these places that was lower before. So I'm just figuring how we can get to those landlords and kind of convince them to do that when they're purchasing these homes and they're getting as much money as they can, since we are a city that have a college, if you may, and they're renting to these college kids, and that's where they're getting money from, So I hope we can get into that, and maybe we might have to have them try to find some other mechanism that we can do it and use that formula to see how we can do it.
It's hard. All those challenges are definitely there. And it definitely takes pounding the pavement and creating relationships, right? To convince landlords to, hey, if you have 20 units in your inventory, can we have 1 or 2 of them, right? Here's the cash we're going to put in your pocket if you can, contribute just a little bit. But it's tough. It is tough, and it works over time, right? Like I said, you're not going to get everything you need all at once. It's such a multi-pronged problem, right? Minimum wage I know is $7.25 in South Carolina too, right? There's so many factors at play here for long-term sustainability, but these are ways to start around adding units. And I do want to see if Gianna and Matt we've been in this conversation for a long time. Just want to see if there's anything I missed that you want me to highlight or pay attention to.
Heather, I don't think you missed anything. I would just remind our council members, and I will send that chart out to you. Remember that those numbers are reflective of Charleston County, and there is a difference between us being the county and then the city of Charleston. I would also say to us, there are some low-hanging fruit. Myself and Heather met with members or the leads of our housing authorities. So what we in fact need to do is follow up with them to determine if in fact they would make this one of at least the top 3 priorities, because to Heather's earlier comments and points, they have a number of preferences that they allow. So then that in effect, the effect of that means there are few preferences, if any. And so because we have seen an uptick, if you will, in the number of our unsheltered neighbors, we want to see if they would consider making that a priority. And the follow-up from that could certainly be a letter correspondence from the mayor with regard to making that request, because I think certainly that would make a difference. I know that many of you have not been introduced to what we call the continuum of care. This study was done as a part of the 7-county area that the continuum of care focuses on, with the county of Charleston and the city of Charleston being a part of that. But the goal again being to see if we can garner a reduction in the number of persons that we are seeing that are homeless, and then being able to transition them into housing. I would make one other point. In the budget that you approved, our home investment partnership program budget for the 2022-23 program year, we did allocate close to 200,000. I think we had to alter it just a little bit to ensure we had a balanced budget specifically to assist with not mortgages, but rent for those persons transitioning out of homelessness. So where we have found that there are some low-hanging fruits, we're trying to grab hold of them, but our number is pretty substantial. And so again, we're going to look at this comprehensively, but there is more work that needs to be done around it.
Yeah, Councilman Waring, you had a question? Is this?
Oh, there he goes.
Oh, no, okay. Anyone else?
I did.
Councilman Gregory?
And, you know, if we can find a 3-bedroom council member, Mitchell, $1,500 in this city, I think you better let us know now.
Yeah, it's on the complex. If you go to the complex that was purchased by Bridgeview, and they have purchased a lot of these complexes around, like the complex on Azalea Drive. So they're about $1,500 a month right now. I don't know if they're going to change, but that's what it is right now, because some of the people are calling me. They still think I'm working, so they call me the system in finding apartments, and they went up there, you know, Baker Hospital Drive, and that's where they found that the rent, the Section 8 certificate was for one thing, but the rent was higher than the certificate. So I told them to call up the landlord back and see if the landlord would accept what the Section 8 certificate was going to give them as a $1,400. They raised it up a little bit more. So that's the problem that they're running into now, trying to find places to accept those Section 8 vouchers or certificate. Any other questions?
Mayor has his hand up.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heather, thank you for working with us. I really appreciate your attention to this and this information. One of your recommendations was to, convene a working group, to monitor this. We do have a somewhat regional commission, Mayor's Commission on Homelessness and Affordable Housing. Gianna might have shared with you. Would that be a suitable venue, so to speak, for what you're proposing, or do you think we need a separate group that's multi-county, or what did you have in mind on that specifically?
That's a great question. I think a group that's constituted the way that yours is should definitely be paying attention to it, particularly if you invest in it, right? If you invest some dollars or time into getting this going, I think you definitely should be paying attention to it. I think there's probably 2 different levels of this. A working group that needs to be started by the continuum of care, which seems to be, we think, is going to start happening over the next month. We made some progress on that a couple of weeks ago. So I think that will start happening at the continuum of care level, which is necessary so that the providers are bought in and paying attention and holding each other accountable to the work. I also think that a commission like that holds a lot of sway and needs some oversight into what they've invested in, right? So that if these things are not happening, that they can push the levers that they can, and y'all can at your level, to make that happen, right? Because Charleston City can't do this on its own, right? Charleston County has to be involved, Dorchester has to be involved, Berkeley has to be involved, right? Like Gianna said, this is across the continuum of care, which is 7 counties, but the majority of the population is in Charleston County that's experiencing homelessness because it's where everything is, right? The same reason the majority of the population is for non-homeless folks is still in Charleston County. Dorchester and Berkeley get the biggest bleed, right? Because of their proximity to you, but I think without that kind of multifaceted cooperation, you won't move the needle because the accountability goes away.
Mm-hmm. And did you look at analyze kind of the state of affairs of temporary shelter in the region or in Charleston County as part of your analysis or look at all this?
We looked at the length of stay in shelters, and it's increased, right? The length of time that people are staying in shelter has increased, which means you don't have places for them to go. It means they get into shelter and they get stuck because there is not an exit, right? There's no exit strategy, no place to exit. So it's mostly depressing, to be honest, when you look at it, right? Is that, we can create all the shelter that we want, but it's not helping. It's not helping the numbers go down at all. It's just another place for people to get stuck. We need the units so that we can exit homelessness.
Understood. Thank you, Heather.
Welcome.
Thank you, Heather, for that presentation. Oh, Councilman Gregory?
Councilmember Saccharin had his hand up.
Well, let me get to Councilman Saccharin and then I'll come back to Councilman Gregory. How's that?
Thank you, Chair. Can y'all hear me fine? Heather, thank you for that presentation. I guess this question is really for Gianna and you. In other cities that I've seen, one way to address some of the homeless issues is, and we've talked about, accessory dwellings here in the district, tiny houses. There are concepts in some cities where they have literally, little community or a little parcel of land that has small 300-400 square foot units that are easily manufactured. They're cheap. It gives folks a way to transition from homelessness to a more permanent structure. Have we discussed that, talked about that? Have we thought about that? Do you know, Heather, if there's other cities that we could look at as an example?
You can look at examples where it just increased people's length of homeless time. The temporary structures are a good fix if you want to clear encampments and you just move people to somewhere else. We have not seen any evidence that it increases a community's ability for people to exit homelessness. It becomes another place for people to get stuck and doesn't actually provide the exit. Transitional housing, which is really what it is, works. We have seen success in small segments of folks who are experiencing homelessness. It's generally around folks who are choosing recovery, who want to go to sober living and want to make those choices. In general, for most people experiencing homelessness, transitional housing is not a solution, and they get stuck there, and there's not enough supportive services. So it's an interim step that costs money that doesn't actually end up in a permanent solution. More cities are looking at that, largely from political pressure to get encampments closed. HUD has just put out an unsheltered notice of funding availability to try and help, because we know from the data that it doesn't work to do these interim solutions, and HUD doesn't want people to invest money there, right? So some of the money from this unsheltered notice of funding availability is going to building new units to try and give some opportunity for folks not to make those real interim decisions like the micro units that you're talking about.
Thank you.
Councilman Gregory?
Yeah, with respect to tiny houses, that's really it's not a new concept, and it has occurred here in Charleston County at some point.
Yes.
I know Mount Pleasant and east of the Cooper. Years ago, they were doing that. I don't know what the success rate was for, but I think their focus might have been more for elderly as opposed to homeless. And my last question is, what are we doing in terms of coordinating with 180 Place? They are a part of the continuum of care. I understand that. But what are they doing with regard to this? We know about transitional housing. And as you stated, Heather, earlier, the inventory is just not there for them to transition from the transitional housing to permanent housing. The inventory is just not there. And just going back to Councilman Saccharin's point, I mean, if we did have, some smaller units developed, my suggestion is that they should be scattered and not concentrated. But that may be permanent housing for some of the homeless, if the square footage is right and everything checks out. So again, I go back to Councilman Saccharin. I'm not dismissing that at all, because it is something that has been on the board for years, and there are other cities that are doing that. My biggest issue is you don't want to create concentrations of lower income or homeless people. I think that would in fact present a problem over the long term. And I agree with Heather that you have to sort of integrate the homeless in the entire community, so that you really don't even notice it. You don't even know that they're homeless. But just making sure that the kind of social services and support would also be available for these people. And then lastly, let's go back to the 3-bedroom. These would be given based upon need, right? Right, Heather? In other words, if somebody is a family of 2 or 3, then yeah, a 3-bedroom would be great for them. But if it's only one person, that 3-bedroom wouldn't work. But can you have 2 or 3 people, in that 3-bedroom that are homeless, that could be sheltered temporarily?
Those would all be options, sure. Shared housing is definitely something we encourage people to think about. And it comes with its own challenges as well, right? It's hard. We all know it's hard to live with people. We know that from our own lives, right? So it comes with its own challenges. But to your question about 180 Place, and Gianna can weigh in on this too, they've been a part of these conversations as well, and are taking the lead right now, on the provider working group to create the centralized housing access point.
And Councilmember Gregory, you may recall that the city, along with the Klein Fund, together have committed over, right at $6 million to 180 Place as well, to build 70 new units of housing. They are awaiting funding regulations from state housing at this point. So there are some challenges at the state housing level. Funding from state housing makes up their capital stack, or the money that will eventually have these units constructed. But the goal is there to provide that permanent housing that Heather spoke of. And Councilmember Saccharin, we did look at the model of tiny houses, and in fact met with a few developers that actually build those types of houses. We're not successful in the translation of that to actual units, but that is a model that we've studied and that we've looked at. The goal being ultimately that we can secure that land enough capital in order to bring that actual unit to bear, be it a 500 square foot or a 900 square foot. But in the city of Charleston, when you talk costs, it's all about the same, but the goal there is bring that permanent unit to the market.
Thank you all very much. Have any other questions?
Now, I would just remind Mayor and Council Member Mitchell and members of CD Committee, we are again looking at the low-hanging fruit. Heather is continuing to work with us. In fact, she's extended her TA provision to us to hopefully help us get through establishing the centralized rental model, because I think that would be critical for us. reaching out to those landlords, getting their participation in this process has been key, because as many of you know, a number of them stopped taking vouchers, which is their choice, but losing them, we lost those units that they have under their management. And so the goal is to get them more engaged. Mayor's Commission is also working on hosting a conversation with landlords to encourage them to once again become more intricately involved in helping us meet this need. Thank you again, Heather.
Can I ask one more question, Mr. Chairman?
One more.
One more. This is my last question. Have we talked about boarding houses? I mean, in the old days, if you had a room available, you rented it, and during the time of segregation, African Americans had no choice but to be in a boarding house situations, because there really weren't any public accommodations for them. And this is just not for the homeless issue, okay? This is for the affordability issue in general. Have we ever discussed going back to the old model of, if somebody's got a bedroom that they can rent in their house to somebody to help them out, they rent it without a whole bunch of complexity? Have we discussed boarding houses as a potential remedy, and not just for homelessness, but for affordability in general?
And Councilmember Gregory, I think that falls this, they call it shared housing idea that has come forth more recently. That is probably the closest thing to a boarding house model. The city worked maybe 3-4 years ago with the Ebenezer Social Action Foundation, when again, you all provided approval for funding for that organization to rehab a house that they owned on the east side. They were able to rent those rooms, if you will, to 4 different gentlemen who all resided there. At the time, they had the space company managing that. So they are still working that process. And to Heather's earlier point, it is not the easiest model to implement, but we have seen that in action, not on a very broad scale at all, but looking more recently at the shared housing to see if our community, we can accommodate that model in our community.
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Waring had his hand up, followed by the mayor and Councilmember Saccharin.
Councilman Waring?
Thank you. I'll defer to the mayor. Follow him.
Okay.
Well,
Mr.
thank
Mayor?
you, council member. I was just going to share a little knowledge I have of a new company that was founded in Charleston by a very fine young citizen here. His name is Derek Snook, and he started a company called Co-Life, where he matches, Councilmember Gregory, homeowners that have an extra room or two with prospective boarders, if you will, who would rent that one room. And he does a little bit of vetting of both the landlord and the tenant, so that, you know, hopefully they'll get along, as sometimes living together presents challenges, right? But it's very creative. It's done online. He's hoping to create a software platform where this is done nationwide, but he started here in Charleston. So you might check that out and recommend it to someone. Co-Life is the name of a new company right here in Charleston.
I'm very familiar, Mayor, and that's part of the reason why I brought it up.
Yeah.
Because I did read that article in the Post and Courier in that regard, and I just thought it was a great idea. So I'm glad that you're aware of it, and our Director of Housing is aware of it as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Waring, and then we go to
Thank you,
afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on Councilman Gregory, Ms. Shaw Johnson, years ago, we had some little, I call them tiny houses, whatever they were, right across from that Matthews Baptist Church on Hugie Street, I think, believe it or not, termites, I think pretty much did them in. There were only like maybe 4 of them. Did anybody know how did that work out? This gets back to that, I guess, transitional housing that Heather was talking about. But do you remember that? Were they successful? What was the result? I mean, we never put them back, but I mean.
Councilmember, I don't remember those in particular. I know that there were some downtown on the west side. I want to think that the Greek church owned that were moved over to where Joseph Floyd Manor is right now. I don't know if those are the same.
No, those houses, I'm familiar with that too, but the houses I'm talking about, I think actually was smaller than those.
Okay.
When you're on Meeting Street and if you headed out of town, you hit Hugie Street, you made a left, and pretty much you go, wasn't even half a block. It would be right on your left. I guess that's housing
authority. Yes, sir.
But they were built like little mini Charleston singles. Okay. And had my understanding Formosan termites took them out. But if you could come up with a model like that, Councilman Gregory, I agree with you not having them concentrated, but your idea about, I'm going to use infilling those. How would you infill those in a community? Would it be 1 or 2 at a time, 3 or 4 at a time? Or what's your thinking on that?
That was an award-winning, if I'm not
it was
correctly, Gian. I think that complex actually got a national award.
I remember it.
That I do recall that a part of the reason for them coming down was termite damage and never replaced.
The land is still there.
I'm with you, but aren't they getting ready to use that land for that new development, Mayor?
Yes.
72 units.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're expanding it.
So those were Freedman cottages that they made 2 units out of each cottage. So they were probably 400 or 500 square feet. So in a sense, they were small or tiny homes or duplexes. But the intent, Heather, was that they were not transitional, that people would live there, for permanently or extended period of time. It was great design. I think you just get back to the same old problem we got here right now in Charleston. The cost of real estate is so high. Can you afford to build Freedman cottages versus a multi-story, multi-family product?
Well, let me follow up on a question. I agree with all of that. Is anybody familiar with an ongoing effort between the city, the county, and the school board, which owns a lot of property, that can be identified for affordable housing needs? I mean, is there a collective that pulled up the property records for the Charleston County School District, the Charleston County proper, Charleston County Council, parcels that's not being used, as well as the city of Charleston, that property that's owned by government or government entities that can be identified for affordable housing? Anybody familiar with an ongoing effort to do that?
Councilmember Waring, I am not. We've met with them in the past around housing and utilizing different buildings for the purpose of recreating or creating housing. Some traction, but nothing concrete. I met with the mayor and superintendent at the time. Postlethwaite was the last time we met with her and members of her team, but we have not had an ongoing effort in the last 2 years, if you will, with the school district around that. We are talking to Charleston County about their efforts. They are establishing a department around building affordable housing, acquiring land for housing under Daryl Davis's leadership. And so we're hoping that we'll see more coming from them sooner versus later, but directly with the school district, we have not had a more recent conversation with them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is my last one.
All right.
Okay.
Councilmember Saccharin has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Meeting.
Go ahead, Councilman Saccharin. Go ahead.
Thank you. Mayor, you stole my thunder on the co-life. He's reached out to me, and I think it's a great idea, but that's another example of the private sector helping us out. But to Councilman Waring's question about school district, I have reached out to Gianna and others in school district, and they are searching for property off the peninsula, is what they told me. In the North Charleston area, they said they were looking particularly West Ashley, but I think Councilman Waring's point is critical. I'm not sure if I can help with this, but I do feel like, Mayor, during our one-on-one, I did recommend that you get with the new superintendent, Don Kennedy, who's very much, I would say, more amenable than perhaps Jarita was to this idea, and getting the powers that be on their operations and facility side with some of our folks, and just figuring out if and identifying those parcels if there's anything there. There was a story that in the paper a couple of weeks back about this mixed use where teachers would, this whole idea of actually working, when you build a school, you actually can build units in the school property itself. So talking about working where you live, there was that concept, but there's also this other concept where it's a mixed use with teachers, fire, police, any public service workers. So when we're talking about getting our city staff more close to work, I mean, I do feel like there's some synergy there with the school district to build something either on the peninsula, maybe West Ashley, but something in the proximate of the peninsula. So I just wanted to share that. I really feel like you need to meet with Mr. Kennedy sooner rather than later.
I requested a meeting. I think it's on my calendar finally, but it took a little schedule checking.
Thank you.
I think it's the week after next, Mayor.
I think it was San Francisco that had a very successful model, Councilman Saccharin, with respect to the school board actually building, they call teacher housing, and they try to build it close to the facility. But lastly, okay, have we checked on VA foreclosures of multifamily developments, FHA foreclosures on multifamily developments? And in many cases, the feds would give that property to a municipality for $1. I've done it. I've done it when I was the director of HUD. I think we did it in Florence and a couple of other places. The property was in foreclosure. There was a need for affordable housing, blah, blah, blah. We came up with a deal where we were able to get that property, that foreclosed FHA property, to that city to develop affordable housing. So again, I'm just saying, I think we may need to look at the VA foreclosures, if we're not already, and the FHA foreclosures, and not necessarily multifamily. If they're single family, VA or FHA foreclosures, perhaps we should start a discussion with them to see whether or not we can negotiate a reasonable price or no price for the property if it's given to the city. And now I'm not saying anything else.
Okay, I hear you.
Councilmember Mitchell, I just wanted to add to Councilmember Waring's question earlier. Our Budget, Finance, and Revenue Collections Department and our Real Estate Division falls under that, have looked at the inventory of city-owned properties. There are 2 of those properties that they have shared with my team that may be viable for the development of affordable housing. Before we bring that information to you all, we're doing reconnaissance around those 2 properties to make sure they are in fact viable from the standpoint of construction. So our real estate division did hear your concerns from the last meeting. They did an evaluation of the properties that we have that are not currently committed in one way, shape, or form. And so hopefully by the time we meet in August, we'll have some information to you with regard to those 2 sites. So just wanted you all to be aware of that.
Thank you very much. So all is well, no other questions. So we move right on to item number 2, which is our rental registration program ordinance. This is Mr. Robert Summerfield, Director of Planning and Preservation, and also Dan Riccio, Director of Livability.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask Becca Hobson to share our presentation with you. And then between Dan and I, we're going to go through with more detail than what was presented at Public Safety last month, the rental registry program, and then talk about what our next steps are.
Okay, can y'all see this?
Becca, you need to switch your monitors. Your presentation is probably on your other monitor from the one you're sharing.
Okay. All
There
right,
you go.
great.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, so Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, so a rental registry program is one in which a property owner is required to keep updated contact information submitted to the city with regard to the property and the tenants of the property. This is not a new program. Columbia has had one since 2016. Our staff in their livability or code enforcement area have noted that livability issues such as loud parties, improper garbage disposal, and things like that have decreased since they've implemented their registry program, because they're able to quickly connect with problems and address them in relatively short order. Other South Carolina municipalities also have a rental registry program. These include Florence, Rock Hill, Clemson, Woodruff, and Spartanburg. Rental registries can run the spectrum from just keeping updated contact information all the way through to robust code enforcement programs that can include really strong inspection programs, sometimes even conducted by a city or jurisdiction's fire prevention personnel or building inspectors. We have been, Beck, if you want to advance. So we've been working on the rental registry concept here for a while now. So there was a registry program was initially conceptualized as far back as 2013. In 2020, though, it really gained some traction. The Neighborhood Services Division in the planning department was tasked to look at what other college towns, specifically college towns, just because we do have the college and that has its own set of unique livability issues, what they do to manage livability. As part of the 2020 city plan outreach, we also heard not just from downtown, not just from the peninsula, but we heard from multiple areas of the city this concern about creating opportunities for greater accountability from landlords. And then since July of 2020 through June of this year, the team, including livability planning through our business and neighborhood services division, and really the star of the ongoing show, which will be the livability group, Dan Riccio, and then legal have been working on this, trying to figure out what the cost would be, how we might implement a program, and what all the requirements would be. One of the things that it's really important to note is that current staff capacity does not allow us to just implement this program. It will require resources, which is why we've proposed it in a phased implementation process. In everywhere that we looked at, there are dedicated staff members who manage a program like this, particularly when you begin to look at the number of units that we would be looking at, just even in the downtown alone, a citywide program. And I'm going to turn it over to Dan, who's going to talk a little bit more about the background surrounding this issue.
Sure. Thanks, Robert. Good afternoon, everybody. So, yeah, the neighborhoods that we visit the most with livability issues are obviously the east side, west side, Cannon Elliott, Radcliffe, and Harleston Village neighborhood. Those neighborhoods accommodate a lot of students and non-student renters. So we look at these areas because these neighborhoods have a higher percentage of rental units and equated with a highly significant number of livability calls, including loud parties, public intoxication, noise complaints, litter, improper disposal of garbage and trash. So trying to resolve these issues in a timely manner becomes difficult because we find it time consuming trying to notify the landlords because we don't know who all of them are. Most of them fall under an LLC, makes it difficult to backtrack trying to find out the exact contact person. So it kind of slows the process. When the process becomes slow, the neighbors are affected and they become frustrated as well as our staff. So this program will give us an opportunity to have a tool to use to expeditiously locate a property owner to address these issues. Next slide, please. So every year it's cyclical, okay? Every year, end of July, the old students move out. Beginning of August, new students move in. I say students / tenants. And it's the same process over and over. We take some to court. We may issue some fines, but still the difficulty exists where finding that landlord, the proper contact, becomes an issue to mitigate the problem, stop the problem, and have a way to stop it without repeating over and over again. So with this repetitive cycle, we have to start our whole education process with these students, tell them the rules every year over and over. It stalls the process. So this program, the rental registration, would be a great tool to alleviate these roadblocks and make it possible for us to have a tool to contact these property owners in a timely manner and address the problem more quickly. Next. So what do? We looked at the percentage of the number of neighborhoods that are taxed at 6%. And as you see here listed below that. And also we corresponded with the rate of disturbance complaints and also livability complaints. And what we did to calculate the rate, we divided the number of generic disturbance calls in each of these neighborhoods and divided by the number of the non-STR rentals. And as you can see, the east side has the highest rate following Cannon Elliott. So that's why we strongly feel that the east side neighborhood would be a perfect neighborhood to start a pilot program. It's manageable with, I believe, around 900 rental properties so that our staff can implement this program in a more methodic manner. Robert?
May I ask a question first, Dan? Okay, if this registration program is put in place, that would be for all 6% properties that's being rented?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, yes, everyone will be accounted for. 6% property owners, whether you're a student or not.
Right, that's what I was saying. Yeah, that's what I was alluding to.
We've said student a lot here, but we really mean any rental property, period.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure of that. Okay.
And that's probably my fault, but most of the problems that exist
It's by
are the
students. Mhm.
A number of the glaring ones. We're going to say a number of the glaring ones tend to be students. Mr. Chairman, Councilman Saccharin has also raised a hand before I go on.
Councilman Saccharin, you can go on.
Thanks, Chair. I'm sorry, Mr. Summerfield. If you've got more to go, I'll wait till you're done.
Yeah, we have a handful of more slides to go in this presentation. So as Dan kind of mentioned, we looked at the data, and I want to thank several of the neighborhood area presidents in downtown have reached out since we did that presentation at Public Safety. I want to make sure that they know here publicly, we understand that pain. We did this is kind of a balance between we looked at the numbers, and then we looked at the budget impact, and we looked at how quickly we thought we could roll a program out. And Eastside just kind of bubbled up to the top of that kind of list where it's a manageable number. We could have a real quick impact with an initial phase of this program there, but it's by no means it was meant to undercut or to make anyone think that we don't take the concerns that they have in the other neighborhoods, particularly and I always say it wrong, Cannonboro, Elliottboro neighborhood. I know the community there, they've been one of the first probably to voice this support for a program like this. So I just wanted to make sure to let everyone on this call know and the community know, we did hear you. We are aware. That's why we think that if we can at least get the program started and initiated and get all of the kinks worked out with a smaller population like the East Side, then we can quickly expand to the other downtown neighborhoods in particular in a relatively short order.
Yeah, Mr. Somerville, before you go on, I just want to make sure, even if we focus that on the East Side, I don't want it to become something that people saying that we jump on the East Side again for everything. When Cannonboro, Elliottboro was the first entity when I used to go to the meetings was complaining about this years and years and years ago. And I understand that the East Siders have the less units that you can probably concentrate on, but I don't want to be a concentration on or the community start feeling that every time you're looking, it's coming back in the community as such.
Yes, no, and to be clear, Mr. Chairman, that is not the intent. It really is.
No, I'm not saying it's what they're going to feel. The community is going to feel, and the perception of what it is when these other communities was really started out with first, because one time the East Side didn't even have all this problem with the rental part of it. In the beginning, it was mostly Elliottboro, Cannonboro, and Racklesboro, and so on, so forth, so on. So I just want to make sure of that, because I don't want us to come back and bite us in the butt, bite me in the butt either, when it comes back to this, folks. And that's what I'm saying. So we got to be very careful how we look at that. I know we have to get to it sooner or later, but just looking at it now, leaving all these particular areas alone, that was the first one that comes in, and because they needed it, because the way they are moving in that particular area with the colleges and other rental problems that you have, and then you jump into the East Side, what came in last, if you may, with the problem that they're having with the rentals. So that's what I'm saying. So we got to be very careful.
Understood. So as you can see on the map, these are units, not properties. I think I may have misspoken or something during the public safety. So I wanted to make it clear that these are the number of units that are in these different neighborhoods, not the number of properties. So one property may have, 4 units, another property may have 40, and another property may have 150. So these are, again, a unit count, not an estimated unit count, I guess I should be clear, not necessarily the number of properties where the registration would be at. So again, the idea is phase 1, we would do the East Side. That would allow us to get up to get initial staffing in place, get the process fully worked out, begin to see where there might be some areas of improvement, because we know there will be, as any new program or pilot program will identify areas where we can do a better job of communicating and responding to folks' concerns. And then in a year 2 phase, move to the other downtown neighborhoods with a future phase. Once we get the core area of the peninsula addressed, then moving the rental registry to the larger city as a whole. Whether that's in year 3 or if that's year 4, we're not exactly sure how quickly we can ramp up to that scale, because we do think that there's 41,000 rental units in the entire city, which is a pretty significant lift for our livability group. This permit program, again, it's a land. So the difference between what Dan talked about with, we give a tenant a ticket and they go to court, but then they may not even live there 6 or 9 months. And then a new tenant comes in and we have similar problems. The idea here is that the impetus is on the landholder, the property owner, to comply with the rental registration rental program or residential rental permit program. Becca, if you could go to the next slide. And so as a part of that certification that they'll do when they are making their application to basically rent a residential property in the city, they're going to certify that their premises meet minimum international property maintenance code requirements, and that the rental units are inspected by a certified inspector once every 5 years. So that'll be an important safety component. And when I talked about that continuum, you know, it's not the just registry or the contact information, but it's also not that full-blown annual, you know, very high-end inspection program that some communities have. So it's a nice middle ground of addressing the broad concerns about being able to connect with the landowner, but also provide a certain level of community sentiment that properties are being kept up as these tenants are renting them. Permits for this program are valid each year and need to be renewed. And if the property gets transferred, the new ownership will need to get a new permit. Landowners are required to live or have a responsible local representative within 30 miles of the city of Charleston. This is an important point because so many of our rental properties are owned by folks who don't live in the city and don't live in even the Tri-County area. And so if we have an issue or concern, we want to be able to contact someone who can address that issue or concern immediately. So we're requiring everybody to have some responsible local representative if their property or if the landlord may live far away. So what we're looking at is something kind of modeled after like a driver's license. So if you have livability code violation issues by whether it's the property owner or the tenant, if the property receives a code violation, there's going to be a points assessed, and the points are assessed based on the nature of the violation. And at a certain point, those points can get your permit suspended or even revoked. The mayor had mentioned during city council on Tuesday, in addition to the conversation from Tuesday about the code enforcement board, we would also look for that reconstituted code enforcement board to be the clearinghouse for appeals on rental registry decisions, so that if there was a need to potentially suspend someone's permit to do their residential rental, they could get before the code enforcement board and have a hearing on the details and the issues related to that. And Dan, I'm gonna pop it back to you for the next slide to kind of talk about the process here.
Sure. Well, for budgeting purposes, we estimate that the program would cost initially about $144,000 for the first year. And we also estimate that it could bring in about $24,000 a year from application fees, because we plan on issuing or using a $25 fee per unit. So that's as far as staff is concerned, but go to the next slide, please. So what we're looking at is 1 administrative position, 2 code enforcement positions. 1 administrative position I already have on standby, and that's already budgeted. We don't have to expend any more money for that, but we would need 2 code enforcement officers to begin with to start this pilot program and make it successful so that we can move on to other neighborhoods throughout the city. In conversations with Columbia, we had meetings with them. They made it very clear that designated staff are needed for this program to be successful. So we want to make sure that going into this process to be successful, we have to have the dedicated staff committed to the program in order for it to work. Next slide, please. As Robert mentioned, the Code Enforcement Board would be reactivated. It currently exists. It's in the code. It has not been utilized in many years, as the mayor mentioned at City Council the other night. And we're looking at a twofold process here to benefit 2 things. the rental registration, and we want to also use it as a process for demolition by neglect or vacant buildings. So during this process, we're also looking at the Code Enforcement Board ordinance, because currently there are 8 members that are tasked by city staff, but we want to look at beyond that. We want citizen participation. We want a resident. We want a property manager, a realtor, building inspector, and maybe even a representative from College of Charleston. But we want to populate it with stakeholders that can have an unbiased view, if you will, when we are, one, addressing the rental registration and have an unbiased view for the appeals process, but we want to use it as a tool to provide more resources or recommendations to try to resolve the issues that we're having with the vacant properties that we currently have. And I will say, just on a quick note, maybe not attaining here, but we currently have, we started out with thousands years ago with the mayor when he worked here, down to 500. We're currently down to about 175 vacant. So we're at a manageable point, and we feel it important to reinstate this Code Enforcement Board, not only to address the short-term rentals, but, the rental registration, but the vacant properties as well. Go ahead, Robert.
All right, so education and community or communication plan for the pilot. So one, we do know that particularly in the downtown area, college students are one of our main groups of tenants. So we would continue to work with communication materials that we could distribute to the college. We will collaborate with the College of Charleston on the text and how we could actually get things to people using text messages or emails or doing even workshops. Our neighborhood services division, as well as livability, they've worked very closely with the College of Charleston on other projects, including Operation Move Out and things like that. So we think we have a good rapport, and we can continue to build on that as it relates to this program. Further, we would be looking at working with landlords, property owners, and their managers and realtor community, doing standard media practices, such as making sure that we got a press release out to folks to let them know. We would also look at mailing some kind of information flyer notice to all the 6% properties within the pilot area, so within the east side. And then as we move to the other neighborhoods, we'd also do the similar rollout there. We'd also provide opportunities for workshops with landlords and property owners so they could come in, ask questions, and better understand what the requirements would be under this program. And then just working with neighbors and owner-occupied housing so that they can understand what's going on. We would also be prepared to present to any neighborhood associations or community groups that may be out there that want to hear how this is going to work. Next slide. So our next steps. So we're here at CD committee today. We are anticipating that based on comments we hear today, we will have the potential to make some edits to the ordinance that the legal team has been working on with us, so that we could have that available as early as the August meeting for first read at City Council, followed by second read and adoption, hopefully in September. We would then initiate the education and outreach efforts so that we could begin getting folks, particularly August. We have move-in for the college. So again, we want to hit the ground running with information for folks there. While we're doing all of that and doing the council process, we would also be finalizing the workflow. We would be working to get the website up and finalizing what that permit application would look like, with the expectation that we fully launch the program in Q4 of this year, based on the resources that we have available now. And again, Dan's budget request, all of it would assume that we'd get the budget request for the necessary positions if council supports the ordinance to begin, have this program in full swing for the pilot with the new year. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I will turn it back over to you. And I think Mr. Councilman Saccharin had some outstanding questions.
Yeah, before Councilman Saccharin come, I just want to make sure that if this is going to start on the east side first, I would like them to, like someone to go to the east side meeting to explain this, because if not, I'm going to have a problem. I already know that already. So I don't know if you all are going to go to the neighborhood association president or not. I think their meeting is coming up the first Wednesday in August. They have the meeting is the first Wednesday in August. And if someone can contact Ms. Sheila Fields to get on that agenda to explain this to the neighborhood association. And I know the literature you're going to put out and try to get to the community, but go to that neighborhood association, because I don't need a big problem coming. And I have enough problems going on, and this is something new coming up, you know, and we having problems there already. So this is what my advice to do is to advise that someone go to a neighborhood association meeting and explain exactly what this is going to be all about. Not on the long term, like we get all this information today, but it's a short presentation of what's going to take place so far as this registration is concerned.
Okay, well, Becca's on here. I'll have her get a hold of
Sheila Fields.
Yes, and we will reach out and try to get on the agenda so that we can preview this. Becca has already been working with a number of neighborhood presidents through this conversation, so hopefully it doesn't take anyone by surprise. The difference would be, I think there's been a lot of conversation. We're finally to a point where we actually can start putting some dates behind when we can actually move forward and potentially take action. But Becca can get a hold and get us on their agenda.
The only reason I say that because the east side is going to be the first one you're starting with. The rest is going to come later. So we are talking about this now, and if we want this approved now, they'll be there before we can get anything done. And all they'll be hearing is, oh, they approved this, and they didn't come and let us know. That's what I'm saying.
Understood.
I'm out there and you all are not. So what I'm saying is that this is what I need to be happening in the community that I represent.
Understood.
Right. Any other, Councilman Saccharin? I think you had a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Robert, for this. I was at the Neighborhood Presidents Consortium Peninsula meeting about a month ago, and this was one of the things that they had suggested that we talk about. So this is timely. A couple questions I do have, and I'm just going to ask the question. I think maybe Councilman Mitchell is alluding to this. I know you all want to do a small pilot. Is the reason for the east side pilot and focused on the east side, is there some sort of practical reason for that, or it's just to keep the numbers small? And might I suggest maybe a little bit from the east side, and a little bit from Elliott Borough, Cannon Borough, if that's possible? If not, you continue with the east side. I just didn't know if it was a practical reason for the east side. That's my first question. The second one is, what leverage are we leaning into with the landlords? I read about a system in another state that ties this to requires them to get a business license. Is that part of this, or was that considered? Being able to basically take their business license away if for failure to comply.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So yes, so on the business license, so do you have to have a business license? The business license is though only if they have, and Becca's going to correct me, it's more than 4 units. Currently, the code is more than 4 units. We're looking at reducing it to 2, correct? Yeah. So that is a change that we would be looking to do to address that and combine the 2. So yeah, so you would put your license at jeopardy if you're non-compliant with the registry program. So that would be kind of the stick in that. Back to the first part of your question. So yeah, so we identified the east side because when we looked at those metrics, they had a high number of livability complaints with a more manageable number of units to get started with the program. So we looked at that number and we said we could get a really potentially big bang for the effort with the east side. So that was the analysis that we put in place when we selected the east side neighborhood to start with.
That's fine. I appreciate the explanation. And then the last question I had was the local representation requirement. So if the landlord doesn't live here, how is that, I guess, how is that even legal? We're going to require them to appoint somebody that's within the 30-mile radius? What if they don't have anybody?
So I've never heard of anywhere that has ever been a problem. That is a pretty standard requirement for these registry programs, that you have someone local who can respond to an issue on your property. Very often that's a property management company. Usually if you're out of the market, you have someone that's looking after your property, that's meeting with potential tenants to give keys and things like that. If you're a smaller operation, that can often be like a family friend or a handyman or something. But I will look at Becca or Dan if they heard anything, but having worked on a similar program for my previous job, in that research, I don't recall ever seeing where that actually was something that was found to be a problem, was having a responsible party.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Gregory has his hand up.
Councilman Gregory, because I just got my reservation. Councilman Gregory.
Yes, I'd like to follow up on Councilman Saccharin's question about the 30-mile radius. Because if you can't identify someone, okay, it could become a tax, because most management companies are going to charge you 10% to manage the property. So I think that I am just as concerned as Councilman Saccharin is with regard to the effect of the 30-mile radius issue. However, my other question has to do with the public housing communities. I know they're not 6%ers, okay? However, when we did this survey, did we take into account any issues with respect to livability with the public housing communities, especially on the west side, the east side, Charleston Village? Were they factored in at all in terms of making the determination of the percentage of livability issues in the community? And then last is, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mayor, we do have a cap and gown committee with the colleges. And I'm just wondering whether or not there have been any discussion with them with regard to this registration program.
So Becca or Dan, I would lean to you on the analysis, because that was.
I did notice on the mapping that there are some areas that are white areas. And I'm assuming that those white areas were public housing projects in the various neighborhoods.
Yeah. So I'm looking at my text, and it says we did put the housing authority calls, those were listed separate. So my understanding from that is that they have a carve out for those. So those are not counted in those numbers.
Okay, because if there are issues, it would go directly to the public housing authority one.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So that was not factored in. If it was factored in, however, what would those numbers look like in terms of livability?
I would look at Dan on that one.
I guess the fair way to answer it, when we have issues at the properties, we work very closely with the housing authority to correct them, and we get positive results. So that's why we're not looking at that as a factor in what we're looking at rental registration, because in a sense you have your own management component with the housing authority, right? All we have to do, we know who they are.
Right.
They're part of it. It takes one call, that's all, we got it. But with these other ones, we have complications in reaching out to that responsible person to address it quickly. All we have to do is call the housing authority. It's done. They work with us very closely. So that's why that, in my opinion, and our research, that was not factored in. because we have a contact person that we can call quickly to resolve the problem.
Dan, let me ask you,
That's what I assume. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
let me ask you a question, hypothetical question, Dan. Suppose we have this in place, and everyone is not aware of it yet, but they're renting a house on the east side and they're renting it to a person that have a Section 8 certificate or Section 8 voucher. Okay. And one of the tenants might violate whatever the case may be, and you try to contact whomever the landlord is and can't contact them, and then the registration, you lose the business license. So what's going to happen to the people that live in that particular apartment or house renting, and where are they going to go?
I normally, honestly, with my experience with enforcement, I don't have problems with or difficulties with Section 8. We can find them quickly through either our housing authority or our information we receive from the housing authority as a contact. So that, in my mind, is not a factor in any of this registration, because we're able to resolve those issues really quickly. We can connect the dots much quicker with affordable housing than we can with the private industry with the other rentals. I don't know if that-
And Mr. Chairman, I would also throw out, and maybe we didn't go into enough detail on the point system, but the reality is with the point system, you have to build up a pile of issues before you're going to get to a place where your license is in jeopardy. It's not there was a loud party at the house, so you got a CPD call, and so you got issued a noise complaint ticket, and now suddenly your rental permit is in jeopardy, and it jeopardizes your license. You will have had to have done the significant things will have had to happen at the property to get to a place where you're actually in jeopardy of that property no longer being able to be rented.
Yeah,
So I guess it's important to note that that's not there's like a camel and straw issue there, that it's not something that's immediately in jeopardy. There's got to be some bad things happening in order to get to a place like that.
Yeah, just asking the questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Since it's something new, I just asking the questions to be familiarized with all. Yes,
Councilmember Appel has had his hand up, and just a reminder, our HARC meeting starts at 5, and we have one more item on the agenda to cover.
Okay, Councilman Appel.
Thank you, Mr.
Sorry,
Chairman.
I didn't see you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and kudos to the staff for putting this together. I think that this is something that is very worth exploring, given some of the challenges we've had throughout the peninsula, not just in any one particular neighborhood. So I'm generally supportive and very open-minded to this approach, but I just wanted to, I feel so torn. You know, on the one hand, I want to say that the fee of $25 is way too low and should be jacked up to help offset the cost of this program, the staff time, the resources, et cetera. But then in the same breath, I recognize that that's going to have a direct adverse effect on the first item on the agenda we talked about today. It's going to add to the cost of housing. It's going to place another burden on landlords, which is going to make it more cost prohibitive, to certain populations on the peninsula. So it's a very delicate balance here, but from a big picture standpoint, we do need to, treat landlords just like other businesses. I mean, Lord knows we regulate the heck out of short-term rentals. I believe we require there to be, on-site management companies, for certain types of those uses. So there is some precedent for that. And we really just need to, get the message out through our policy that the days of just being an absentee landlord that's not paying attention to the quality of their structures, that's not paying attention to their tenants and what they're doing, that those days are over in the city of Charleston. And we're going to try to highlight and focus in on some of the worst offenders. So, I know I'm a little bit all over the place with my comments here today, but I definitely think that this is a conversation worth having. Maybe there's a way to sort of highlight and identify sort of maybe the worst offenders, so to speak, so we don't cast an overly broad net, right? Looping everybody into this program and increasing the cost of housing sort of writ large. But we sort of, through our resources, be it CPD, livability, building code, staff. I mean, if we can identify the properties where there are problems, perhaps we could go in with a scalpel as opposed to, a shotgun approach. But again, just some minor comments. I like the fact that we're talking about this. I think it's something very worth considering, but we just need to be mindful of, there's some competing values and interests at play here. And I hope I articulated that clearly, but I appreciate everybody's engagement on this issue and look forward to seeing where we go from here.
Thank you. Thank you for the comments.
Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else have, Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I offer my thanks to Robert and Dan and Becca and all the staff that have worked on this, Meg as well, and legal. It's really come a long way. As was pointed out, a similar type of proposal was made before I became mayor back in 2013. The real estate community was not supportive. We went to them this time and got their input, and I believe they are, at least their official representation, their association is supportive. I also wanted to share with you that last Friday when I was at the Municipal Association meeting, they had a little afternoon session on public safety given by Skip Holbrook, the chief of the Columbia Police Department, and some of his team. And they showed these maps of the areas, particularly surrounding the University of South Carolina and 5 Points, where they've historically had lots of house parties, lots of disturbances, admittedly mostly from students, but from others as well. And they showed all the rental units in those neighborhoods. And according to Chief Skip, this was a terrific tool to add a layer of accountability to landlords. And ultimately, and I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, 100%, we need to go talk to the association. But long-term, the whole point of this is to improve livability in our neighborhoods. I mean, it adds accountability for bad actors. And I hear you, Councilmember Pell, that maybe we could do a scalpel rather than a shotgun. But I mean, the fact is you never know who the tenants are going to be. And in today's world, particularly where ownership of rental properties has kind of been veiled, cloaked with LLCs, and it's so much harder to know who's who. I'll be honest with you. I really think to give us a long-term effect of a program like this, you got to include everybody, and it's not that onerous. I mean, we're asking for a $25 annual fee, so it's a very reasonable thing to ask. And I think the intent of this, though, is just think about that long-term livability, and I think our citizens are going to be very pleased long-term with a program like this. Thank y'all.
Anyone else have any other questions? If not, we can move on. Any other questions? Everyone is fine? Okay, we'll move. So what we need to do with this particular item here?
My apologies, Councilman or Mr. Chairman. Could I just ask, was there, as we're trying to finalize a ordinance to bring forward to council for first reading in August, was there an opinion from this committee as to whether or not to continue to include the requirement for a local property representative or not? That seemed to be the only point of, I don't know, contention's the wrong word, but just as we're drafting that, was there an interest in us trying to make some change there? Again, that is an important component of the program, but we want to make sure we bring something to council that can be acted on. And Councilman Saccharin has his hand up.
Councilman Saccharin?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I was concerned, Robert, but not so concerned to leave it out. I mean, maybe it's worthy of discussion in council as we go through first and second reading. And my question was more about, is that legal to do? But if you've seen it in other places, I'm good with keeping it in.
Thank you, sir.
Ditto.
Okay, do we need a motion? Do we need a motion here to carry on to city council or just?
I move that we present, well, first, don't we have to approve it as a committee?
Yes, and
then and once we do that, it goes to council.
It goes to council. We have to approve it first.
Okay, I move that we approve.
I'll second.
Okay, it was approved that we forward the rental registration on to city council. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
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 Opposers? Ayes have it, so this will go on. So we'll move right on to number 3, discussion regarding frequency of meeting, because we have a few minutes. We have a couple of meetings at 5, which I have one at 5 also. Meeting on community development. This is I think Councilman Saccharin and Councilman Appel, I think, wanted this to be placed on the agenda.
Ross, you want to go? Then I can go and try to get out of here. I got a meeting at 5, so.
Sure. I appreciate that. And I appreciate y'all putting this on the agenda. I think this is one of the most important committees that we have at the city. You know, as Councilman Gregory has pointed out on numerous occasions, under our code, this committee technically has jurisdiction over not just, you know, affordable housing, homelessness issues, things of that nature, which is, you know, typically takes up the predominant amount of time we spend in this committee. But the committee also has jurisdiction over general, you know, planning and zoning policy. And there are several jurisdictions in the area. Mount Pleasant is one of them for sure. I think Folly Beach as well, that have separate committees of council that sort of do the same thing as the Planning Commission does. And what I mean by that is not reviewing every single proposed rezoning or subdivision or anything like that, but when there's zoning ordinance amendments that are coming through the process, that you make a pit stop over at the CD committee. And we did that before, you know, when we were moving that minimum parking requirement ordinance through the process. I think we had several meetings here at the CD level. And I just think that it's healthy for us to be, as council members, more engaged in sort of the manufacturing and development of zoning and land use policy. So it doesn't just hit us at council after going through the Planning Commission, that we also have some feedback as the policies are being developed, so to speak. And so in order to effectuate that, I think it's very difficult if we try to pack all of that in with all of the stuff that you know, Gianna and her department bring forward to us in the same agenda. So maybe what I would propose is that we meet more often as a CD committee, but we almost break the CD committee down like the way we break the BZA down. In other words, we could have like a CD committee meeting / Gianna's department. Then we could have a CD committee meeting where it's more Robert and Christopher and Lee and the zoning department. So we sort of separate the functions out a little bit, and there'll be times when there's some overlap, and this doesn't need to be sort of a you know, super strict rule, but just generally from a preparation standpoint, you know, we sort of divide up the tasks of the CD committee sort of that way. But you know, when I look out at the city's issues and challenges around affordable housing and all the things we always talk about, there's so much work that needs to be done from a planning and zoning perspective. And I just think that it's incumbent upon us as council members to activate that responsibility, and, you know, honoring the committee structure, as Councilman Gregory has pointed to over the years. And that's just going to require us to do more through this committee. And I think it's an exciting opportunity. And I just think that that's something we ought to consider. So I appreciate everybody indulging me and listening to me on that, and look forward to the discussion.
Councilman Saccharin?
Thanks, Chairman. I'm not going to belabor Ross's points, but I mean, I agree 100% with those points. So either we separate and divide the meeting into two. Once a month, it's planning and zoning, and the other once a month, it could potentially be some of the other issues. The other thing I do want to mention is HARC gets up and running, and we've got our second meeting this evening at 5 o'clock. We're charged with the next couple months to basically come to council with recommendations on where the special commission recommendations are go. As you all know, a large portion of those recommendations really should be funneled through CD. So we're going to be charged with a lot of work over the next 6 months to a year as we funnel through and kind of reconcile with some of the recommendations. I don't want it to take any longer than it needs to, and we're already getting pressure from the community about the pace that HARC is moving. So I want to be intentional about the process, and I want to have an infrastructure in place. So when those recommendations are discussed and forwarded, we're not flat-footed and waiting, because I will just say that the HARC process, the way we have it designed, it's going to take a while to get out of HARC to the standing committees. I don't want to add undue burden and extra time to the process. So I agree with Ross. If there's any way we can meet twice a month, maybe divide the work up, that'd be great.
Okay, in my opinion as a chairman, I don't think we need to have another meeting as such and schedule a two scheduled meeting per month. If there's a meeting that we need to call, we need to have a call meeting. We have so much meetings going on now that is butting up with each meeting right now that we're having. And we are stressing, you know, even the clerk's office out with these meetings, and we have a whole lot of meetings. So I believe if we need to have a meeting, we can always have a call meeting for the CD committee if we have something else coming on the agenda that we need to discuss, if it's something with planning or zoning or planning or something else. But just to have a regular scheduled meeting, 2 regular scheduled meetings a month, that's going to put a lot of pressure on everyone else who's even working and who is having, even with the clerk's office, putting all these things together. So we're not only thinking about, we can't only think about ourselves on a lot of different issues. We got to think about others too, you know, working and have to do other meetings the same that we are doing now. Because some of us have 2 meetings per month. Some people have 5 or 6 meetings per month, like I have 7, 8 meetings per month, not just no 1, 2 meetings. Some of us don't have that type of meetings that we have to attend all the time. So I believe if you need a call meeting or something that's coming up more important that we can't wait for the CD committee meeting, we can call another CD committee meeting. And I think that's the way we should do it when things arise that way. That's just my own opinion. I have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Saccharin has his hand up.
I think
Well, let me get Councilman Gregory first. And then
Councilmember Gregory.
Councilman Saccharin.
It's really, at least in my opinion, it's just been within the last 4 years or so that I think that the standing committees are finally functioning the way they should be. In the past, some of our meetings would be 15 minutes long and we're gone. And I just don't think that that's a fair representative of the interests of the people of the city. So I am all for, I mean, this meeting's almost 2 hours, okay? And we haven't even touched a lot of the stuff that we should be touching. I don't think that I think as needed is fine, but I do think, however, on community planning and development right now, there's a lot coming through. And Mr. Chairman, we may have to call more than 1 meeting a month to get through all that I know that we need to get through, especially when we get into this zoning piece. And we're hiring a consultant to do an overall look at our zoning. And as those things come through, it is going to take a long time. But I don't think you can separate housing and community development from zoning because zoning is the essence of housing and community development. But for that, there would be none. So, I'm sort of in the middle here, but I do think that there is a need for us to spend more time and effort in these standing committees and dealing with these issues like we just did today. And we should do that with every issue that's brought before us. So, I'm I'm contemplating the same with human resources, that we have 2 meetings every month until we get to a point where perhaps we don't have them. Especially as a new chairman, just learning the process, and all the committee members are new. It is going to require, okay, it's going to require more time for us to really get a hold of things and be able to, from a knowledge base, make recommendations in the interest of our residents.
Anyone else?
Just my last comment, Chair, that's all.
Councilman Sackler, go ahead.
Thank you. I understand what you're saying, Councilman Mitchell and Councilman Gregory. I just want to applaud Jennifer and her team around instituting the standing meeting schedule, because that is tremendously helpful. We're all not, no offense, I'm not retired. I have a family with other jobs. So having standing meetings on the schedule is tremendously helpful to build around that schedule and be flexible. Maybe a compromise, Councilman Mitchell, would be a standing CD meeting the second week in Thursday, and you make that call, we make that call as a team prior, either it's on or it's off. At least I can build it in my calendar and schedule it, knowing, all right, if we are going to have a CD meeting, it's going to be this day. And if not, we don't need it, then we don't need it. I mean, would that be something you'd be open to?
Well, see, that's what we have to check to see how all these other meetings are coming forth. Real estate, this meeting, that meeting, that meeting, all these meetings that you're having, we can't have it the butt into one another and still don't have enough time to even, do the things that we need to do with the meetings. So that's why I say if we have a call meeting, we can make sure that there's nothing else going on in that particular day, that we have this meeting, that we can really go through the agenda, give it the time spent that we need to have. So that's what we have to look at. And I have to check more with the clerk to see how all these other meetings, with these other meetings, the dates these meetings, the time these meetings come up, and there's who's going to be available to be at the meeting, because you're going to have the quorum to these particular meeting also. So all these things have to be taken in factors when you schedule these particular meetings. That's all that's what I'm alluding to. Not saying that we don't need to have more meetings. No, I didn't say that. Councilman Gregory, you're on mute.
And after Gregory, Councilmember Appel had his hand up.
I mean, the staffing effort for these meetings that we don't even know about, okay, is a lot. It's a lot for them just to prep for just one meeting. But again, I on an as needed basis, because a lot of it comes from staff. We rarely just call a meeting based on a specific agenda items. Most of the time is driven from staff up. That's not to say that we can't put things on the agenda ourselves. So I think a lot of this is going to go into whether or not staffing is at a point that they could support 2 meetings a month from CD, 2 meetings a month, perhaps from Human Affairs, 2 meetings a month. I'm just saying it's a lot of it's staff driven.
And that's why the time was changed, because the community development was later. It used to be at 4 o'clock or 4:30, so we changed it to 3 o'clock to have more time to to be able to discuss, because we know a lot of things was coming on the agenda for the city committee. Councilman Pale, I think you had your hands up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this has been a good discussion. And like Jason, I mean, I'm a real busy guy. Like, I'm in Georgetown right now. I represent the city of Georgetown. I've got to go brief them in executive session. I'm trying to do a committee meeting on Zoom, going up through the Francis Marion National Forest. I get it. These meetings are a lot. We have a lot on our plate as council members. I totally get it. We signed up for objectively crazy jobs. There's no question about it with what we do. That all being said, the needed zoning and land use policy changes that we need to make in this city are not going to happen organically. It's not going to happen we always are like kind of looking into other sources to solve these problems. It's going to be the consultant that redoes the zoning ordinance for us. It's going to be the HARC is going to give stuff to us. Guys, there's so much stuff in the original report that the commission came up with. There's stuff in the comp plan that we adopted last year that's just sitting on a shelf right now that we can implement. It's incumbent upon us as the legislative body of the city of Charleston to pick these ideas up, put them on committee agendas, and develop them through the legislative process. Staff bringing things for us is very important, but that should not be the only function here. I mean, we need to be much more engaged in the legislative process as the city. It's not our job just to show up, look at these agendas, approve, discuss, vote on it at a city council meeting. We need to be the ones bringing this stuff forward in legislative. Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Appel and Mitchell, I can confer with Jennifer and her team and look at a date if it is the desire of the city committee that would be an option for the committee. If that second meeting is necessary, as I believe Councilmember Gregory proposed, and then we could bring that back to you in August.
And Mr. Chairman, just to back up what Gianna was saying, I think Councilmember Saccharin has to sign off, actually have to sign off so that we can start another meeting.
Yes.
So why don't we look for a second date? Gianna and I will get together where we could possibly have another CD meeting, and we'll just leave it up to the pleasure of the committee if that's what you want to do.
And
Okay,
not
that'd
to throw too much more oil on that, but just a reminder that the Department of Planning coordinates more than 100 public meetings as well a year. So our calendar is not short on meetings. So we need to be just careful when we're scheduling, particularly if we're wanting additional participation within the planning department, just because of all of the meetings that we also run separate and apart from the council.
Absolutely. And I think Jennifer is aware of those, so I'll make sure I chat with her and follow up with you, Robert, and Councilmember Mitchell. We will bring that back for the consideration of the city committee in August.
That'd be fine.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions before
Move
we
for adjournment.
sign off?
Move for adjournment. Move to adjourn.
We got a second? Nobody's saying anything, so I'll second it myself. All in favor,
Thank
vote by
you.
saying aye.
Aye.
You're moving right along. Okay, have a good day.
Bye-bye.